Hello and welcome back to the Scenario 7 podcast. My name is Sam, and today we are here for a Dutch Grand Prix review. And of course, I couldn't do it alone. Today I'm joined by Mr. Joe Roberts. Joe, how are you doing, mate?
I'm doing well, Sam. How are you?
I'm doing good, thank you. And as I said, Dutch Grand Prix review. And we've got to start on the Saturday. Let's start with qualifying, of course. And my first question to you, Joe, anything stand out to you?
I think for me it's just well, I would say the a bit of a people and the Dutch fans and also stewards, not stewards. What's it called? Work staff there being a bit stupid and throwing flares on the track and kind of disrupting qualifying. But also the fact is that Verstappen still dominating around this track. But the Ferraris could have got pole. Obviously, Leclerc was very unhappy. I probably could have got it if his first sector was a lot better than. I think it's either first or middle sector was a lot better. Could have got pole away from Verstappen, but apart from that, interesting that the Alpines didn't get into Q3. But then Tsunoda also, I think Tsunoda or Stroll, I think got into Q3. I think
Both did.
Yeah, both did. So very impressive, kind of boosting their experience in Q3 rather than getting knocked out in Q1 or Q2. And then it was just a very interesting quali, but again a bit disappointed that Max kind of dominated.
Yeah, I mean, you've brought up quite a lot of the points. It was definitely disappointing with seeing the amount of flares that were in the stadium and one getting onto the track. I mean, it was pretty well known that they were going to have a ban on flares, but there were still so many, and that definitely marred qualifying. But on track, a few other points. Bottas and Ricciardo out in Q1. It's more of a shock that Bottas has got knocked out, but the Alfa Romeo isn't exactly that strong. And Ricciardo getting knocked out in Q1 isn't really a surprise anymore. It's just his season's been a bit of a nightmare. As you said, both Alpines out in Q2, but still showing some fantastic race pace. So that was a surprise, but they did make up for it in the race. And as you said, Stroll, Tsunoda, and Schumacher, I'll bring him up as well. Getting through to Q3, I think that was a massive positive for those drivers and shows that they are developing. It is a bit weird for Stroll to get into Q3 because his biggest weakness has always been qualifying. Like, his race pace is fine, but he gets so much flack because he always qualifies so badly. So maybe we'll start seeing some better qualifying performances from Stroll. Perez spinning on the final run was frustrating for me and stopped him doing any better. And then, Verstappen on pole. The floor changes clearly haven't done anything, as that Red Bull just still looks so strong. Now to Sunday, Joe, before you go in detail, what were your general thoughts on the race?
I think it was quite interesting. I think it's probably one of the best races probably since round 6. I think after Monaco or Spain, I think this is probably the most interesting race, just due to the fact that you had to kind of pit twice. It was kind of, the deg was that high, which for me, I think every track should be like that, just due to the fact that it kind of spices up the racing in a way, and causes different variation of strategy, as obviously Verstappen going on the softs and Hamilton and Russell going on the medium. So it kind of made it a bit more interesting. I think if everybody went on the softs, then I think it would just be in a very boring race, because obviously Verstappen would have gone off and won it. And then obviously you got the incident with Tsunoda causing a virtual safety car. For me, it should have been a full safety car just for the fact it took them 2 laps to end it, and then obviously then Bottas. So yeah, obviously Bottas brought out the safety car, and then it kind of spiced things up. But yeah, for me, it was a very intriguing race.
Yeah, it was definitely a good race. On top of what you've mentioned, you have Ferrari always trying to provide some entertainment in the different ways that they can mess up the race. It's impressive seeing how they do it every time. As you said, the virtual safety car and safety car made the race strategies really interesting, and it was very clear that it benefited some teams and some drivers, but with some drivers it definitely had a detrimental effect. But we'll come on to that a bit later. But yeah, it wasn't a bad race. It was probably in the top half of races this season. Let's go to the incident report now. And there aren't really many things to talk about. But the first thing is Yuki Tsunoda, lap 47. He pulled to the side of the track with a differential issue after previously pulling to the side of the track and pitting in the laps before. Now, there's a lot of conspiracy theorists online who are saying that it was them doing Red Bull a favor. Now, Joe, what's your opinion on this? Is this just a car issue, or is it the sister team like doing Red Bull's wishes?
I wouldn't say that, as in obviously I like a bit of controversy, but I wouldn't say the AlphaTauri would on purpose. I think it's a bit, though those reports are a bit absurd, and I think I think on Twitter they posted out after, I think a day after the race, of the conspiracy theory. I think it's quite disrespectful to the team. But it did. The only thing I question it on is the fact is you stop out on track. It kind of, for me, mean that if you go back into the pits, you have to then retire if you're doing up a seatbelt, and then going out back onto track, and then seeing it as a sensor issue, and then basically stopping in the same place. It can't, in that way, I kind of understand the suspicion, but I think it's just AlphaTauri not kind of preempting something, and they should have retired when he was back in the pits. But yeah, I don't know. I for me, the reports are a bit stupid.
Yeah, I agree with you. I don't think there was anything suspicious about it. I mean, that would be Red Bull and AlphaTauri getting risky and getting kicked out of the championship. And when Red Bull have such a comfortable lead, at the top of the constructors, there's no way they're going to risk that. It was just funny because you had Yuki Tsunoda pulling aside to the track, saying the tire's not on properly. And then he starts undoing his belt, and they're like, no, you're fine. He goes in the pits. Then they've got to re-fasten his belt, which you're not really allowed to do. And then he starts going out of the pits, and they're on the radio saying, there is something wrong. You've got to pull to the side of the track because you're not allowed to stop in the pit lane. And to be honest, I think it would have been better he stopped in the pit lane, because they could have just closed the pit lane for a bit and just kept the race going. But it made it interesting. But was it suspicious? No, I don't think so. We also had on lap 55, Bottas breaking down on the main straight, causing a safety car. Of course, not really a talking point, but still an incident. And then moving on to Carlos Sainz, who I think is lucky to only get one penalty this weekend, because the penalty that he got was a 5-second penalty for unsafe release. And first of all, Joe, do you think that was a fair penalty?
Yes and no. The fact is, I think Carlos Sainz went into anti-stall. It looked like he went into anti-stall because he got off very, very slowly. But then again, you can't do that. Even it counts as an unsafe release because Alonso had to brake. But yeah, that's my thoughts.
Yeah, it is a tough one because the Dutch circuit at Zandvoort the pit lane is so tight. So you've really got to be precise in the pit lane, like when coming out of your box. And there was a time this weekend where someone was coming out of the pit, and one of the mechanics at another team literally had to dodge out of the way. So it's just so tight. So I think it's tough, but I think it was fair. I think 5-second penalty for unsafe release. He did come out just in front with anti-stall or not. So I think 5-second penalty for that was fair. But I also think he was lucky not to get penalised for overtaking under yellow flags. He did that when I think it was Bottas. Yeah, it was Bottas stopped on the main straight and the yellow flags came out and he still overtook the car and he didn't give the position back, though he did kind of dive into the pits, I think, if I remember. So maybe that stopped him from getting it. And then for a mechanic leaving a wheel gun in an unsafe position for Perez to run over, I also don't think that's fair, because if Perez had, if he'd have gone over that and the tyre had popped, he's then flying into some team's pit wall. So I think, again, another potential penalty. Joe, these two incidents, do you think, am I just overthinking it? Or...
I think you're overthinking the latter one in terms of, I think it's just the fact is that I think the tightness of the pit lane basically caused that, and it was slightly ajar outside their box. I don't think that's worthy of the penalty or science, because that's the spare wheel gun just in case the first one doesn't work. The one with the overtaking on yellow flags, I think you have a case just due to the fact on the steering wheel of Ocon, I think it was Ocon or Alonso. It did say that it was a yellow flag coming up. So I think he got away with it. I think the only reason he got away with it was just basically the fact is he was in front on the start finishing line, start finishing line before sector 1. I think that's the only way that saved him.
Yeah,
it was pretty dangerous because obviously Bottas' car being left in that position on the first corner.
Yeah, I think he was lucky. I do think he was fortunate, but he got one penalty. So 2 penalties would have been harsh. 3 penalties would have been super harsh, but you never know what the stewards are going to give. Let's go to the team-by-team breakdown. And, of course, starting with the team at the top of the constructors, flying high on 511 points, looking pretty unstoppable. This weekend, they got 36, including the fastest lap. And the fastest lap was attained by Max Verstappen, who in qualifying put his car on pole and in the race finished first in a very dominant weekend. And then Perez starting 5th after his spin in qualifying and finishing 5th. What do you think about Red Bull's weekend? I mean, they got the most points out of any team, but potentially disappointing from Perez as part of the garage.
Yeah, I would say I think it's glass half full in terms of the fact that they did get away with one. The fact is, I think Lewis would have pushed them to the win if there wasn't any safety cars. And Perez, I think this weekend, even in Spa, I think he's been pretty woeful. Ever since he got the contract, he hasn't been up to speed with Max, and that might just be because Max has gone up an extra gear. But I think from Perez's perspective, you'd be very disappointed about being 5th place and should be a lot higher up the grid.
Yeah,
the reason I say this, considering his car is the best, you would expect him to be ahead of the Mercedes and maybe in front of one Ferrari.
Yeah, it was definitely a frustrating race from Perez's point of view. He just couldn't really do anything in that car, which is frustrating. Hopefully it improves, but at the end of the day, he is just the perfect teammate for Verstappen, because whenever Verstappen needs him to be good, he is good. Like in this race, Verstappen was so dominant. And in Spa, he was so dominant that I know Perez is trying to do his own thing and compete himself, but from a Red Bull point of view, Perez has turned it on when they've needed the points. And yes, it's been disappointing the last few races, but he still, in my opinion, is the perfect teammate for Verstappen. But moving on to a team that's a lot less dominant, and that is Ferrari. High expectations at the start of the season. And while second in the constructors, they could be falling back in the next few weeks. They've got 376 points and got 19 points in Zandvoort. Here's Charles Leclerc, who put his car in second in qualifying and then finished third in the race. And then Carlos Sainz started third and finished eighth. Now, Joe, lot to say about Ferrari. And this weekend, it was mainly just Sainz is side the garage messing everything up. But what do you think about their weekend? I mean, from the awful pit stop to it was just a lot of mess from Ferrari. But yeah, what do you think of their weekend?
Yeah, I don't understand. Yeah, at the moment, I don't really understand what Ferrari do, as in them being generally just Ferrari. Ever since 2008, they haven't really sorted out their strategy, and they in the beginning of the season they had the best car by, I would say, a country mile, and obviously Red Bull have got that back over, I think, got that back within 3 or 4 races. But it's the way that it's kind of dropped off that's, in Ferrari's perspective, it's quite concerning. The fact is they keep on making mistakes. Binotto keeps on saying, "Oh, it's roses and it's going well," and the fact is it isn't. And there'll be questions on his future as team principal. And as in going back in generally to the Netherlands, the fact is that Sainz made a huge mistake. Leclerc could just do the best he got with the car. Probably should have got pole. And it's just in Ferrari's terms, this season has been a huge amount of errors. And you see Mercedes in general, they got an awful car and they're third. I think it's only like 20 points now.
30 points.
Well, 30 points now, which is doable for them. I think if Ferrari keep on this way, they're going to end up being third, which at the start of the season, Mercedes having a shocker, you would expect them to be fighting Red Bull for that constructors title. So from a Ferrari perspective, I would say it's been quite a shambolic race weekend, and you would say that for Spa as well.
Yeah, and how many other weekends?
Yeah, that's the thing. You would say there's been, I would say, probably 6 shambolic weekends, which you can't have if you want to win championship.
Yeah. And the thing is, they've built a good car. I mean, they've had reliability issues, but for the most part, they have built a good car. It's just the strategy is awful, and the drivers have made errors as well. So it's so frustrating. I do feel for Ferrari fans at the moment because it is all going wrong. And then you have the bonus this week of, as if it can get any worse, the lorry carrying the engines to Monza, the tires over the brakes overheated and caught on fire. So they had to get the fire brigade to put the tires out, which is the most Ferrari thing I've seen all season. But you mentioned it there, Binotto, questions over his future. Is it time for him to go? Are the problems with Binotto? I personally think it's a more deep-rooted issue, but does change start with him?
I think with Ferrari in general, I'm just gonna say it's a very Italian issue in terms of motorsport. In general, I don't think, even if you look at other Italian teams like Alfa Romeo, Lamborghini, in their respective championships, they've had issues in terms of strategy and or even general getting out performance out the car. Ferrari, I think Binotto, I think it's quite hard to explain because Binotto is a good technician in terms of setting up the car and all that sort of stuff and getting that side to work in terms of car performance. But in terms of business, maybe he's doing a bit too much, which then kind of impacts him kind of getting out the race team in order. But then who would you get for team principal that has, it would have to be intern in terms of Ferrari because they like having it within house rather than going to other teams. So yeah, it's for me, it's more intern, but I think Binotto needs to take a huge amount of responsibility of not firing people when they should be fired in terms of strategy and just strategy and getting the car set up in the right frame. But that's again, that's been a problem for Ferrari for like 20 since Ross Brawn left, I think, and Grant Todd. I think it's Grant. No, is it Grant Todd?
Franz Tost.
Yeah, Franz Tost. Yeah.
Yeah, it is something they need to sort out, whether that's at the end of the season or midway through. The name that keeps going around in my head as a potential replacement, Günther Steiner, right? Because they need a man that will just he will call out if you're doing something wrong. He will be very blunt with you and he will axe people who he doesn't think is good enough. So I think from that point of view, it'd be great. He already has a great relationship with Ferrari because Haas has a engine deal with Ferrari. And I really like Günther Steiner. I think he'd be a good team principal at Ferrari. So he's the name that's been going around in my head. But that would be quite the appointment that would see ripples through the F1 world. But let's move on to Mercedes. Now, didn't do quite as well as Red Bull, but did gain points on Ferrari. They're now on 346 points. They got 30 points this weekend. George Russell started in 6th, finished 2nd. Very good race for him. And Lewis Hamilton finished 4th after qualifying from 4th. And Joe, I mean, good points for Mercedes, but is it looking back, what could have been, especially for someone like Hamilton?
What is in terms of the championship if they started his car?
No, in terms of if they had pitted him at Zandvoort, could he have potentially brought more points home for Mercedes?
My point of view in this is the fact is that they had to. For me, what I would have done is kept Russell out and try to DRS train it with Lewis. The fact is, I think that could have worked. The other thing you could have done is just told Russell just to defend for like as many laps as possible. But yeah, I think Lewis, there was a possibility. The fact is of obviously Verstappen's tyres going, just trying to push to get Hamilton, that his tyres would degrade to a point where he can overtake Hamilton because obviously his decent straight line speed. So I don't think it's really a race what it could have been if he pitted. I just think it was the safety car and the VSC suited Verstappen so well that it was a point where it's like a toss of a coin if it's going to work or not. But for me, they should have kind of tried to block the track in terms of putting two Mercedes.
Yeah, it was, I think, frustrating from a strategy point of view because, in my opinion, potentially both Hamilton and Russell could have pit, and in the end, only Russell did. But Russell only pit after he went on radio and was like, "We should pit, we should pit." So this wasn't even Mercedes' plan that one of them would pit. It was Russell being like, "We should do this, otherwise we're just going to get caught out. And I just felt bad for Hamilton because he was never going to compete with Verstappen, because Verstappen's a quicker car, he had fresher tyres, and Hamilton's just there falling back the order. I mean, he did pretty well to get fourth, but I did feel sorry for him. And I think from a strategy point of view, Mercedes didn't quite get it right. But if you're looking at over the years, how many amazing strategy calls have Mercedes made? So I feel like this is one of the weekends where they could have done a bit better from that point of view. But unlike Ferrari, where it's every week, it's more of a one-off blip for Mercedes. And the team behind Mercedes in the constructors are Alpine on 125 points. They picked up 10 points this weekend. And after a frustrating qualifying where Alonso was 13th and Ocon was 12th, they ended up with Alonso in 6th and Ocon in 9th, getting some great points and gaining some places to the most consistent drivers on the grid. How do you rate their weekend?
I think it's very good that they beat McLaren, which is their objective. So, but yeah, I'm very impressed with Ocon and Alonso in terms of the fact that it's a very hard track to overtake. So, yeah, it was a good result for the Alpines.
Yeah, certainly a great result. And they're just so super consistent. I mean, I know Alonso had problems this year, but even when Alonso's had problems, Ocon's just consistently there, whether it's like 6th or around that position, or if it's just like 9th or 10th, he will just consistently get points just every week. And well, that's the difference between Alpine and McLaren, because it's there's so much emphasis on Norris to get the points that it's just impossible for them to compete. But yeah, Alpine, for me, unless we see an incredible turnaround from Daniel Ricciardo in the last few races, I think they've got 4th place in a bag and a fantastic season with a lot of intrigue around what happens next season with, of course, Alonso leaving. Who's going to be Ocon's teammate? Looks like it's going to be Gasly. Supposedly don't get on that well. A lot of question marks for next season, but for this season, definitely had a good one and will probably get 4th. But on to their competitors, of course, McLaren on 101 points in the constructors, 24 behind Alpine. They got 6 points this weekend as Lando Norris qualified 7th, finished 7th. And then Daniel Ricciardo qualified 17th, finished 17th. So it is quite the tale of two different stories here. It is Norris getting all the points and Ricciardo struggling to get in the top 15. But Joe, you're a McLaren fan. What do you think of this weekend?
Yeah, I don't know. As in, obviously I didn't watch Q1 just because I was I forgot what the time was. But I heard that it was dust on the track, and then obviously you can get. But I think the problem for me with Daniel is the fact is that he is really talented, but he's just lost the full confidence in the car. The fact is that he's more comfortable with a car that turns when you brake, which a lot of the older drivers are finding quite difficult. So it's kind of the fact is that is getting quite a dim end to his McLaren career when there was so much like expectation with Ricciardo, and then you got Norris, young, pulling everything out of the bag in a very difficult car to get 7th. Seventh or it was 7th. Yeah, for me is what the interesting next year for McLaren in terms of the fact is it the car? The fact is it just Ricciardo's trying to get the maximum out of the car, but it's just the car's not doing what it wants to do, and it's just terrible. Or is Norris an incredible driver? Which I'll probably go with the Norris an incredible driver, which means the fact is Osprey Astri is going into that seat kind of means the fact is that is he in effect going to a 7th place car in the pecking order of the teams. So yeah, as you said, going from two halves, that's it. It's just Norris getting the maximum out of the car and Daniel just doing his best.
Yeah, it's a tough one for them, and Ricardo doing his best, but at the moment, his best is nowhere near good enough, and it is, yeah, it's hard to see, but yeah, as you said,
Sam,
very
what do you think it is? Do you think it is the car, or do you think it is Norris getting of like putting the bar higher than it should be?
I'm gonna say it's a mix of both and sit a bit on the fence because I think that Lando Norris is a fantastic driver. I think he's one of the best drivers on the grid, but I also think that Ricardo's not pulling his weight. The car doesn't suit him, but there are drivers on this grid who the car doesn't suit them. And over time, they've grown accustomed to it and got used to it and adapted. Ricardo has just not adapted at all. And I get it. People specialize in a certain type of machinery. Like Ricardo has his setup and his car that he likes, but you need to be able to adapt. You have to be able to adapt to a new scenario. And he just hasn't done that. And that has been his downfall. On to Alfa Romeo now. 0 points this weekend, 51 points in the constructors. You had Bottas from 16th to a DNF and Zhou Guanyu from 14th to 16th. Is there much to say about Alfa Romeo this weekend?
No, isn't just really disappointing from their point of view in terms of Bottas, and then obviously Zhou basically finishing where they started.
Yeah, it's just reliability again, isn't it? Their car just has zero reliability, and at the moment, it doesn't even appear like they have race pace, which at least they had at the start of the season. They had poor reliability but good race pace. Now it's like they have not great race pace and still the poor reliability. So, yeah, not much to say about Alfa Romeo, but the fact that they've built an unreliable car has meant that they've spent all their money on just fixing it and not much money on developing it. So, yeah, Alfa Romeo, not a great race. And Zandvoort, on to Haas now. Another team got 0 points this weekend, 34 points in the constructors. Kevin Magnussen went from 18th to 15th in my fancy team, getting myself some 8 points. Wow, unbelievable points from him. And then Mick Schumacher going from 8th to 13th. Both had pretty anonymous races, apart from when Magnussen decided to whack into a barrier instead of going across the corner, but carried on racing. But yeah, again, another one like Alfa Romeo. Haas, what is there to say?
I think it's just the fact is Mick Schumacher needs to try and step up. I think there's rumours of him getting out of the Ferrari Academy, which means basically he needs to now perform in order to keep that Haas seat if Daniel Ricciardo is sniffing around it.
And Hulkenberg, supposedly. Hulkenberg's also another contender. So that would be nice. It'd be hard because I love Ricciardo and I love Hulkenberg, but I think I'd prefer Hulkenberg in the seat just because he's been out of the sport for so long, and that's really sad because he's one of my favorite drivers. But we'll have to wait and see what happened with Haas. But yeah, he's certainly under pressure, Schumacher, as teams supposedly are looking to go to experience rather than developing a young driver, especially those towards the back of the grid. Now to AlphaTauri, third team in a row with 0 points. They've got 29 in the constructors. You have Pierre Gasly, who went from 11th to 11th, so just stayed exactly where he was. And Yuki Tsunoda went from 9th, fantastic qualifying position, to a DNF. And I'm just going to quickly say, AlphaTauri have got to be probably the most disappointing team this season in terms of their car. I mean, it is nowhere, and it's so reliant on Gasly and Tsunoda pulling something out of the bag. And they didn't this weekend. What do you think of their race?
Yeah, as in now it gives big questions if Gasly's head's turned for next season, if you're going to Alpine. I don't think I don't. At the moment, I don't think Gasly's showing the form in order to be kind of promoted up the grid in terms of where AlphaTauri is. Because of this current form, the fact is they're not getting points, and Gasly not really performing out of the skin of the car like last year. And then Tsunoda being Tsunoda.
He's improved this year though. He has improved, and I think he's beating Gasly in the points.
Yeah, the one thing, as I would say, is the fact is he's beaten his teammate, but he's been quite anonymous this season.
But in an anonymous car, you just have to beat your teammate. That's your main aim. And so far, he's doing that. Well, I think Gasly will probably still finish ahead of him. But so far, Tsunoda, it's an improvement, in my opinion, on last season. And he is still developing, despite in this race. I mean, it wasn't his fault, of course, but who knows what went wrong with that car? I mean, they said it was a differential issue. Yes, it was. I'm not saying they're lying, but it was just such a weird circumstance that I still can't quite wrap my head around. Now to Aston Martin and the last team who got a point with one singular point, bringing them 1 point closer, of course, to AlphaTauri, but they are on 25 points now, 4 points behind Red Bull's sister team. It's Sebastian Vettel, who started 19th after messing up the final corner in qualifying, to finishing 14th, and then Lance Stroll qualifying 10th in a fantastic piece of quality, and again showing that his race pace is strong by holding on to that 10th position. How do you look at Aston Martin's weekend? Do you think they will catch AlphaTauri? There's another bonus question.
Oh, no. I'm going to say no. Just the fact is, I think AlphaTauri's car is better than Aston Martin. And I think Aston Martin, looking at next season with Fernando Alonso and the vision there. But I think Aston, as you say, AlphaTauri, most disappointing car this season. I've got to say Aston Martin as well, in terms of the fact is there's high hopes with Vettel going to there for carrying on for another season, and obviously Stroll staying there. And then obviously, all that funding and whatever, changing the name, think, okay, they're going to really kick on. But it feels like they kept taking a step backwards this season. So I don't know. I don't think they will catch them, just due to that fact that they were so far behind AlphaTauri before then. But I think going to the result from Stroll in the Grand Prix, I think it was a very solid job, and kind of makes his reputation as not as an F1 driver, rather than being his dad's owned a team, so he gets a race seat kind of thing. He's kind of hopefully gaining that respect that he is an F1 driver rather than his dad's money car driver kind of thing.
Yeah, no, it was a good result for Stroll, as you said, and they have been disappointing. It's been weird this season because as it's a whole new regulation, it's just down to who has interpreted it the best and who has messed up. And there's a few teams that have messed up. I think Mercedes at the start of the season got it completely wrong. Red Bull have Adrian Newey, and he is just like a genius. And you give him any regulation, and he will smash it out the park. He did his whole thesis at, I think it was university, on ground effects and what effect it has on race cars. And then, of course, this season you have the porpoising issues, and Red Bull the only team who don't, because Adrian Newey is such a pro. So yeah, this season it's been who has interpreted it well, who hasn't. AlphaTauri and Aston Martin haven't. But I mean, even if they finish where they are, I mean, they're only Well, I think they're both one or two places down on last season, so
Yeah.
they haven't made steps forward and have only made steps backward. But yeah, Lance Stroll, good point for the lad. Williams now, final team. 0 points this weekend, 4 points in the constructors. Alex Albon qualified 15th, finished 12th. Nicholas Latifi started 20th, gained 2 places, finishing 18th, but those would both do the DNFs.
I was going to say that.
Yeah. What do you think about Williams? I mean, 4 points. Are they going to catch the 21 points on Aston Martin?
No, I know. What unless Albon does a sensational race. Yeah, for me, this season again is I'm going to say quite a huge disappointment. The fact is of Williams getting new owners, getting new facilities, and all that sort of stuff. They should be doing better. They have the talent to do better. They probably don't have one driver to do better in Nicholas Latifi. And for me, if they want to improve, they need to address that. But yeah, as in that answers your question about if they can catch Aston Martin, which I don't. In terms of this weekend, just Albon outperforming the car. Again, if the two retirements didn't happen, he would have finished where he started, so in 14th. So
yeah. It's tough for Williams because, as you said, there's such an emphasis on Albon having to get the points because Latifi isn't. And it's tough, but Latifi is the worst driver on the grid. He is probably one of the nicest guys on the grid. And so that's hard because despite the fact that he's a paid driver, I feel like he just embraces every race and he just loves his Nutella and he's just such a sound guy. But I think this is his last season in F1. Nick De Vries is looking very likely to replace him. Maybe Logan Sargent in with a shout as well, but I think that's if he can get the points. I don't know if he does or not, but this weekend, anonymous race, not bad from Albon, to be fair, 15th to 12th, probably the best he could do in the car. And then Latifi just being at the back, like always. Now, moving on to some positivity and driver of the day. Now, Joe, we were having a discussion about it beforehand. You weren't sure who you were going to go for. Who have you chosen?
I think I have to choose the person who's got pole, the driver who has also won the race and got the fastest lap, and that's Max. And he's been dominant. He's kind of Lewis-esque, as probably many Dutch fans don't particularly like me saying that, but is Lewis-esque. Is in a dominant car over the field. And the fact is, it reminds me of 2008 where Ferrari were in a very dominant position then and then just bottled it. And it kind of feels like the same way. The fact is that the Red Bull being consistent and performing well. And yeah, Max has just absolutely dominated this race. And if it wasn't for the safety car, it might be a different story, but that's just how F1 is.
Yeah, I mean, he's dominated this race. He's dominated this season. He's a worthy champion this season and a worthy race winner this weekend. But I've gone for someone different. I've gone for one of the Alpines, and the man I've chosen is Fernando Alonso. He made his weekend difficult, qualifying in 13th place. Of course, both Alpines did. So not sure if that's a car issue, if that's a driver not getting the best out of the car. But from 13th to 6th, I mean, his race pace was immense. He cut his way through the field, finishing 7 places ahead of where he started. And of course, he got fortunate with the Sainz 5-second penalty and did profit from that. But he put his car in a position to profit from that and had a very, very solid race. So for me, I don't think there were many standouts for driver of the day. Russell maybe another, but for me, Fernando Alonso, for the most positions gained from where they started, is the man I'm going to choose. And that wraps up our podcast reviewing the Dutch Grand Prix in Zandvoort. We hope you enjoyed it. And of course, the next race is only a few days away, the Italian Grand Prix at Monza. We're very much looking forward to that, and we will bring you a preview to that. But if you liked this episode, drop us a subscribe, give us a like, comment down below what your thoughts were on the race. Remember, our links to our socials are down below in the comment section, and of course, also in the comment section on audio platforms. But yes, thank you for listening, and we'll see you in the next one.